Lecture 1. Indian Constitution, Historical Background and Making of the Constitution. Indian Constitution, the longest written constitution in the world, stands as a monumental framework that governs the largest democracy. Understanding its historical background is crucial for CAS aspirants as it forms the ideological foundation of Indian polity. The evolution of the constitution was a gradual process influenced by centuries of colonial rule, national movements, and the political and administrative necessities of a diverse nation. The roots can be traced to various British statutes such as the Regulating Act of 1773, which marked the first step in British parliamentary control over India, followed by acts like the Pitt's India Act 1784, Charter Acts 1813, 1833, 1853 culminating in the Government of India Acts 1858, 1919, and 1935. Among these, the Government of India Act, 1935, is the most significant, as it served as a blueprint for the Indian Constitution, introducing federalism, provincial autonomy, and the concept of fundamental governance which later shaped the constitutional framework. The Indian National Congress and other freedom movements played a pivotal role in the demand for a constituent assembly. In 1934, M.N. Roy first proposed the idea, which was later officially accepted by the British government in the August Offer of 1940. The Cripps Mission 1942 and the Cabinet Mission Plan 1946 laid down the procedural framework for the Constituent Assembly, which was finally constituted in November 1946. It had 389 members initially, later reduced to 299 after the partition. The assembly, presided over by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, included notable figures like B.R. Ambedkar, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, and Alladhi Krishnaswamy Iyer, among others. B.R. Ambedkar, regarded as the chief architect of the Constitution, chaired the drafting committee formed on August 29, 1947. Constitution was framed over 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, after detailed deliberations, borrowing features from various constitutions globally, the parliamentary system from Britain, federalism from Canada, fundamental rights from the USA, and directive principles from Ireland. The preamble, drafted with precision, reflects the objectives of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Constitution was framed over 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, after detailed deliberations, borrowing features from various constitutions globally, the parliamentary system from Britain, federalism from Canada, fundamental rights from the USA, and directive principles from Ireland. The preamble, drafted with precision, reflects the objectives of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Constitution was adopted on the 26th of November 1949 and came into effect on the 26th of January 1950, chosen to honor the Declaration of Purna Swaraj made in 1930. This transformation marked India's transition from a colonial state to a sovereign democratic republic. The significance of the Constitution lies not just in its legal supremacy but in its ability to adapt. Through amendments and judicial interpretations, it has evolved to meet contemporary needs while safeguarding the essence of the Indian Republic. It is this dynamic yet stable character that makes understanding its making and evolution vital for administrative aspirants. Previous year questions. The Government of India Act, 1935 is referred to as the blueprint of the Indian Constitution. Critically analyze the statement. CAS 2020. Answer. The Government of India Act, 1935 introduced federalism, bicameralism, provincial autonomy, and the idea of a written constitution. Many of its administrative frameworks were adopted in the Indian Constitution. However, it lacked fundamental rights and was not based on popular sovereignty, unlike the Indian Constitution. Who was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Indian Constitution? CAS 2018. Answer. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The idea of a constituent assembly was first proposed by CAS 2019. Answer. M.N. Roy in 1934. Would you like the next lecture on fundamental rights, directive principles, Indian federalism, or something else? Let me know what area you want to tackle next. You said history of the world from mid-18th century. ChatGPT said great choice. Here's a high-quality, lecture-style note on history of the world from the mid-18th century, tailored specifically for the CAS Junior Timescale Stream 1 exam. It covers key themes, important developments, and previous year questions, all in a dense, paragraph-based format with no wasted space. Lecture 2, History of the World from Mid-18th Century. The mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socioeconomic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was tightly linked to the rise of capitalism, colonial exploitation, and class consciousness, eventually inspiring both reformist and revolutionary ideologies such as socialism and communism. Parallel to the industrial transformation was the rise of political revolutions, beginning with the American Revolution, 1775-1783, which laid the groundwork for constitutional democracy by establishing the first successful colonial independence movement against a European power. Lecture 2, History of the World from Mid-18th Century. The mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socioeconomic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was tightly linked to the rise of capitalism, colonial exploitation, and class consciousness, eventually inspiring both reformist and revolutionary ideologies such as socialism and communism. Parallel to the industrial transformation was the rise of political revolutions, beginning with the American Revolution, 1775-1783, which laid the groundwork for constitutional democracy by establishing the first successful colonial independence movement against a European power. It was closely followed by the French Revolution, 1789, which radically altered the political landscape of Europe by challenging the divine right of kings, feudal privileges, and promoting the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution resulted in the fall of the Bourbon monarchy, rise of republicanism, reign of terror under Robespierre, and ultimately led to the emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose imperial ambitions spread revolutionary ideas across Europe but also led to a conservative reaction after his defeat in 1815 at Waterloo. The 19th century was dominated by the Congress of Vienna, 1815, which sought to restore monarchical order in Europe and maintain balance of power, but could not contain the growing forces of nationalism and liberalism. The revolutions of 1848, though largely unsuccessful in immediate political terms, signaled the rise of nationalism, socialism, and demands for constitutional government across Europe. These currents eventually led to the unification of Germany under Bismarck, 1871, and Italy under Garibaldi and Cavour, 1861, reshaping the map of Europe and establishing powerful nation-states. Meanwhile, imperialism intensified during the late 19th century as European powers scrambled to colonize Asia and Africa. The mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socio-economic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was The mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socio-economic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was tightly linked to the rise of capitalism, colonial exploitation, and class consciousness, eventually inspiring both reformist and revolutionary ideologies such as socialism and communism. Parallel to the industrial transformation was the rise of political revolutions, beginning with the American Revolution, 1775-1783, which laid the groundwork for constitutional democracy by establishing the first successful colonial independence movement against a European power. It was closely followed by the French Revolution, 1789, which radically altered the political landscape of Europe by challenging the divine right of kings, feudal privileges, and promoting the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution resulted in the fall of the Bourbon monarchy, rise of republicanism, reign of terror under Robespierre, and ultimately led to the emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose imperial ambitions spread revolutionary ideas across Europe but also led to a conservative reaction after his defeat in 1815 at Waterloo. The 19th century was dominated by the Congress of Vienna, 1815, which sought to restore monarchy. The mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socio-economic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was tightly linked to the rise of capitalism, colonial exploitation, and class consciousness, eventually inspiring both reformist and revolutionary ideologies such as socialism and communism. Parallel to the industrial transformation was the rise of political revolutions, beginning with the American Revolution, 1775-1783, which laid the groundwork for constitutional democracy by establishing the first successful colonial independence movement against a European power. It was closely followed by the French Revolution, 1789, which radically altered the political landscape of Europe by challenging the divine right of kings, feudal privileges, and promoting the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution resulted in the fall of the Bourbon monarchy, rise of republicanism, reign of terror under Robespierre, and ultimately led to the emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose imperial ambitions spread revolutionary ideas across Europe but also led to a conservative reaction after his defeat in The revolution resulted in the fall of the Bourbon monarchy, rise of republicanism, reign of terror under Robespierre, and ultimately led to the mid-18th century marked the onset of profound transformations across the world that reshaped societies, politics, economies, and ideologies, laying the foundation for the modern era. The first major event of global consequence was the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain around 1750 and later spread across Europe, North America, and eventually the world. It replaced agrarian economies with mechanized industry, radically altering labor systems, urbanization patterns, and socio-economic structures. The invention of the steam engine, spinning jenny, and power loom revolutionized production. This technological advancement was tightly linked to the rise of capitalism, colonial exploitation, and class consciousness, eventually inspiring both reformist and revolutionary ideologies such as socialism and communism. Parallel to the industrial transformation was the rise of political revolutions, beginning with the American Revolution, 1775-1783, which laid the groundwork for constitutional democracy by establishing the first successful colonial independence movement against a European power. It was closely followed by the French Revolution, 1789, which radically altered the political landscape of Europe by challenging the divine right of kings, feudal privileges, and promoting the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The revolution resulted in the fall of the Bourbon monarchy, rise of republicanism, reign of terror under Robespierre, and ultimately led to the emergence of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose imperial ambitions spread revolutionary ideas across Europe but also led to a conservative reaction after his defeat in 1815 at Waterloo. The 19th century was dominated by the Congress of Vienna 1815, which sought to restore monarchical order in Europe and maintain balance of power, but could not contain the growing forces of nationalism and liberalism. The revolutions of 1848, though largely unsuccessful in immediate political terms, signaled the rise of nationalism, socialism, and demands for constitutional government across Europe. These currents eventually led to the unification of Germany under Bismarck 1871 and Italy under Garibaldi and Cavour 1861, reshaping the map of Europe and establishing powerful nation-states. Meanwhile, imperialism intensified during the late 19th century as European powers scrambled to colonize Asia and Africa. The Berlin Conference 1884-85 formalized this exploitation through partition diplomacy in Africa. Imperial expansion led to the exploitation of native populations, resource extraction, and imposition of foreign governance and education systems, sowing seeds of future nationalist struggles in colonies. The 20th century opened with World War I, 1914-1918, triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand but rooted in deep nationalistic rivalries, imperial ambitions, and entangled alliances. The war caused massive devastation and ended with the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, which imposed harsh penalties on Germany and laid the foundation for future resentment. The Russian Revolution of 1917, led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, introduced the world's first communist state, fundamentally challenging capitalist democracies and colonial empires. The interwar period was marked by economic crises, notably the Great Depression 1929, and the rise of totalitarian regimes such as fascism in Italy under Mussolini and Nazism in Germany under Hitler, which ultimately led to World War II 1939-1945. This war, more destructive than the first, saw the Holocaust, atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the eventual defeat of the Axis powers. Post-World War II, the United Nations was formed in 1945 to maintain global peace and security. The Cold War 1947-1991 that followed was a bipolar ideological struggle between the capitalist USA and communist USSR, marked by proxy wars Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the arms race, space race, and diplomatic brinkmanship Cuban Missile Crisis. This era also saw the decolonization of Asia and Africa, with India gaining independence in 1947 and a domino effect inspiring liberation across continents. The Cold War ended with the dissolution of the USSR in 1991, marking the triumph of liberal capitalism, though contemporary geopolitics reflects a more multipolar and contested world order. The post-Cold War period has been shaped by globalization, terrorism, notably the 9/11 attacks in 2001, technological revolution, climate change debates, and the rise of China as a major global power. These developments underscore the importance of understanding historical continuities and changes in power, ideology, economy, and society. Previous year questions. The French Revolution laid the foundation of modern Europe. Examine the statement. CAS 2020. Answer. The French Revolution challenged feudal structures, promoted the rights of man, popularized ideas of secularism, liberty, and nationalism, and inspired democratic revolutions worldwide, thereby shaping the political ideology of modern Europe. What was the immediate cause of World War I? CAS 2017. Answer. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in 1914. Who led the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia? CAS 2018. Answer. Vladimir Lenin. Let me know if you'd like the next lecture on a specific theme like Indian freedom struggle, geography, economy, polity, or any particular world event in more detail. You said. Industrial Revolution. ChatGPT said. Here is your high-quality, lecture-style note on the Industrial Revolution, crafted with maximum informational density, historical depth, and aligned precisely with CAS Junior Time Scale, Stream 1 exam requirements. Lecture 3, The Industrial Revolution, Origin, Spread, Impact, and Significance. The Industrial Revolution refers to the unprecedented transformation in production processes that began in Britain around 1750 and extended to Europe, North America, and eventually the rest of the world. It marked a decisive shift from manual labor and agrarian economies to mechanized industry, factory-based systems, and mass production. The revolution was not merely an economic shift but a comprehensive social, political, and technological upheaval that laid the foundation of the modern industrial world. It began in Britain due to a unique combination of factors: availability of coal and iron, a vast colonial empire that ensured raw materials and markets, a robust banking and financial system, political stability, agricultural innovations like the enclosure movement, surplus labor due to rural displacement, and scientific curiosity fostered by the Enlightenment. Technological innovations were the core drivers. James Watt's improvement of the steam engine, 1769, Richard Arkwright's water frame, Hargreaves' spinning jenny, Crompton's spinning mule, and Cartwright's power loom revolutionized textile production, leading to the factory system. Iron and coal industries boomed as Abraham Darby's method of smelting iron with coke and later Bessemer's steel-making process improved the quality and scale of industrial output. The invention of the steam locomotive by George Stephenson and the expansion of railway networks facilitated the rapid transport of goods and labor, knitting markets together and accelerating urbanization. Britain's industrialization soon spread to Belgium, France, Germany, and the United States, each adapting the process according to their resources and socio-political structures. The Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, circa 1870, brought electricity, chemical industries, internal combustion engines, telegraphs, and later telephones, fundamentally altering industrial practices and global communications. The Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, circa 1870, brought electricity, chemical industries, internal combustion engines, telegraphs, and later telephones, fundamentally altering industrial practices and global communications. It was during this phase that corporations, monopolies, and financial capitalism began to dominate, especially in the United States and Germany. Socially, the Industrial Revolution gave rise to a new class system. The bourgeoisie or capitalist class accumulated immense wealth, while the proletariat or working class toiled under poor conditions in factories with long hours and low wages. This created the conditions for the rise of labor unions, the demand for social legislation, and the birth of ideological movements like socialism, Marxism, and anarchism. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, witnessing the exploitation of workers, wrote the Communist Manifesto 1848 calling for a proletarian revolution against capitalist modes of production. Utopian socialism of Robert Owen and scientific socialism of Marx reflected different responses to the inequalities generated by industrial capitalism. The Industrial Revolution also had profound global consequences. It intensified colonialism as industrialized nations sought raw materials and markets abroad, contributing to the scramble for Africa and Asia. Technological superiority of industrial powers led to military dominance, economic control, and cultural hegemony over colonized regions. Environmentally, the massive consumption of fossil fuels initiated ecological degradation and air pollution, marking the beginning of the Anthropocene era. In India, the Industrial Revolution had a destructive impact on indigenous industries like textiles, due to British policies of deindustrialization. The import of cheap mill-made British goods led to the decline of Indian handloom and handicrafts, rendering millions unemployed. While some railways, telegraphs, and modern industries were introduced, these served colonial extraction more than Indian development. The revolution also triggered reforms. In Britain, the Factory Acts 1833 onwards sought to improve labor conditions, prohibit child labor, and regulate working hours. Education laws, urban planning, sanitation reforms, and public health movements emerged to counter the social evils brought by rapid urbanization. The Industrial Revolution thus stands as a turning point in world history, shifting the trajectory of human development, class relations, economic organization, and environmental interaction. Its legacy continues to shape global economics, labor dynamics, and technological advancement in the 21st century. Previous year questions. What was the main feature of the Industrial Revolution in England? CAS 2021. Answer: the shift from hand production methods to machines and the establishment of factory-based production, especially in textiles, driven by innovations like the steam engine. The Industrial Revolution laid the foundation of modern capitalism but also led to new social inequalities. Discuss. CAS 2020 Answer: while the revolution increased production, trade, and wealth, it also created class divisions, poor working conditions, and urban poverty, prompting ideologies like socialism and labor rights movements. Which invention is most closely associated with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution? CAS 2019 Answer: the steam engine, especially as improved by James Watt. Let me know if you want the next lecture on French Revolution, American Revolution, Indian Freedom Movement, geography, economics, or any other topic. You said, World Wars. ChatGPT said. Here's a comprehensive, high-quality lecture note on World Wars, First and Second World Wars, tailored exclusively for CAS Officer, Junior Timescale, Stream 1 exam. This lecture is structured to be dense, factual, analytical, and directly relevant for cracking the exam. No tables, no empty space, just content-rich paragraphs with PYQs. Lecture 4, The World Wars, Causes, Course, Consequences, and Legacy. The two world wars of the 20th century were not isolated conflicts but were deeply interconnected, shaping the course of modern history by redrawing global power dynamics, dismantling empires, and giving rise to new ideologies and institutions. Both wars have their roots in the complex web of imperialism, nationalism, militarism, and alliances formed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The First World War 1914-1918 was triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914, by a Serbian nationalist. However, this act only served as a spark to a Europe already brimming with tensions due to aggressive nationalism, secret alliances, Triple Entente of France, Britain, and Russia versus Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and arms race, and colonial rivalries. The war was fought primarily in Europe but involved colonies and nations across the globe, making it a truly world conflict. Trench warfare, massive casualties, and the use of new weapons like machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and airplanes characterized the brutal nature of World War I. The war ended with the Treaty of Versailles 1919, which imposed harsh reparations on Germany, reduced its territory, disbanded its military power, and assigned war guilt solely to it. The treaty's punitive terms bred deep resentment in Germany and economic hardship, which would directly contribute to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Second World War. The First World War led to the collapse of empires, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and German, and spurred the Russian Revolution 1917, which established the first communist state under Lenin. The Second World War 1939-1945 had its origins in the unresolved issues of World War I and the economic devastation caused by the Great Depression 1929, which destabilized global economies and gave rise to totalitarian regimes. Fascism in Italy under Mussolini, Nazism in Germany under Hitler, and militarism in Japan emerged as aggressive ideologies promising revival, expansion, and national pride. Hitler's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, in violation of the Munich Agreement and following his annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia, triggered Britain and France to declare war on Germany. The Axis past Germany, Italy, Japan were opposed by the Allied powers Britain, France, USSR after 1941, USA after 1941, and others. The war witnessed unprecedented destruction, aerial bombings, the genocide of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, and the use of nuclear weapons for the first time in history on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 by the United States. Key events included the Battle of Britain 1940, Operation Barbarossa 1941, which marked Germany's failed invasion of the USSR, and Pearl Harbor December 7, 1941, which brought the USA into the war. The turning points came with the Battle of Stalingrad 1942-43, which broke the back of the German army, and the D-Day landings June 6, 1944, in Normandy, leading to the liberation of Western Europe. The war concluded with the unconditional surrender of Germany in May 1945 and Japan in August 1945 after the atomic bombings. The consequences of the Second World War were profound. The United Nations was established in 1945 to prevent future conflicts and maintain international peace. Europe was left devastated, leading to the emergence of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, whose ideological conflict gave birth to the Cold War. The war also marked the beginning of the end for colonial empires, as the moral and financial exhaustion of European powers accelerated decolonization movements in Asia and Africa. It further solidified global economic restructuring through institutions like the IMF and World Bank created at the Bretton Woods Conference 1944. The war also transformed the role of women, as their participation in the war workforce challenged traditional gender roles, eventually fueling feminist movements. In science and technology, military research contributed to innovations in medicine, aviation, and communication, while the horrors of war sparked ethical debates around nuclear weapons, genocide, and international justice, leading to the Nuremberg trials against Nazi war criminals. Military research contributed to innovations in medicine. In science and technology, military research contributed to innovations in medicine, aviation, and communication, while the horrors of war sparked ethical debates around nuclear weapons, genocide, and international justice, leading to the Nuremberg trials against Nazi war criminals. The legacy of the world wars is still relevant. They gave rise to internationalism, the human rights movement, and efforts at global governance. They also highlighted the dangers of unchecked nationalism, economic inequality, and authoritarianism, lessons that remain vital for administrators and policymakers today. Previous year questions. What were the main causes of the First World War? CAS 2019. Answer. The causes included militarism, alliance systems, imperialist rivalries, aggressive nationalism, and the immediate trigger, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. What was the significance of the Treaty of Versailles in the context of World War II? CAS 2021. Answer. The Treaty of Versailles imposed severe penalties on Germany, fostering economic hardship and national resentment, which were exploited by Hitler to gain power, thus directly contributing to World War II. The Holocaust during World War II refers to, CAS 2017. Answer. The systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others by Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. Let me know which topic you'd like next: Cold War, Indian national movement, modern Indian economy, geography of India, or anything else on your syllabus. You said. Redrawal of national boundaries. ChatGPT said. Here is your fully loaded, high-quality lecture note on Redrawal of National Boundaries, 19th and 20th Century, tailored precisely for CAS Officer, Junior Time Scale, Stream 1 exam. This lecture is rich in historical analysis, packed with crucial developments, and includes previous year questions. It avoids all fluff and tables, delivering maximum knowledge density to help you crack the exam. Lecture 5. Redrawal of National Boundaries, Causes, Key Events, and Consequences. The redrawal of national boundaries refers to the shifting, merging, or creation of new political states and borders, largely driven by war, colonialism, nationalism, decolonization, treaties, and ideological conflicts. These redrawn borders were not just cartographic changes but deep structural transformations that influence identity, conflict, statehood, and diplomacy. The 19th and 20th centuries witnessed the most extensive boundary changes in human history, especially in Europe, Asia, and Africa, fundamentally altering global geopolitics. In the 19th century, the rise of nationalism following the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars reshaped the political geography of Europe. The Congress of Vienna 1815 was a major attempt by conservative monarchies to restore pre-Napoleonic boundaries and balance of power, but this was short-lived. The unification of Italy 1861 under leaders like Cavour and Garibaldi and the unification of Germany 1871 under Bismarck dramatically redrew European borders by consolidating dozens of fragmented kingdoms and principalities into nation-states, fueled by ethnic, linguistic, and historical identities. The early 20th century saw a more violent and disruptive redrawal due to World War I 1914-1918. The Treaty of Versailles 1919 and associated treaties dismantled the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian empires, giving birth to new nations like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Borders were redrawn along ethnic lines, but these often failed to reflect complex demographies, sowing future conflicts. The Sykes-Picot Agreement 1916 secretly divided the Middle East between Britain and France, creating artificial boundaries in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, which continue to generate instability. World War II 1939-1945 resulted in even more dramatic boundary changes. The defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan led to the occupation and division of these powers. Germany was divided into East and West, with Berlin split among the Allies, laying the groundwork for the Cold War. Korea, previously under Japanese rule, was divided along the 38th parallel into North and South Korea in 1945, a division that persists and remains militarized. Poland's borders were shifted westward, losing eastern territories to the Soviet Union but gaining lands from Germany, resulting in massive population transfers. Israel was created in 1948 from British-controlled Palestine under a UN plan, triggering one of the most intractable conflicts in modern history. The Cold War era entrenched boundary shifts ideologically. Eastern Europe was brought under Soviet influence, and the Iron Curtain divided Europe between capitalist and communist blocs. Vietnam was divided into North and South until reunification in 1975. Germany's reunification in 1990 after the fall of the Berlin Wall was a reversal of Cold War boundary divisions. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was one of the largest redrawals, breaking it into 15 independent countries including Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, and Central Asian republics. Decolonization in Asia and Africa was the most widespread redrawal process. After World War II, weakened European powers retreated from colonies, but left behind hastily drawn or imposed boundaries that did not account for ethnic, linguistic, or tribal realities. India's partition in 1947, creating India and Pakistan, was among the most tragic boundary redrawals, leading to mass migrations, communal violence, and permanent hostility. Later, Bangladesh emerged in 1971 from East Pakistan after a civil war, another boundary creation based on language and identity. In Africa, borders were retained as drawn by colonial powers during the Berlin Conference 1884-85 despite crossing ethnic and cultural lines, leading to internal conflicts, civil wars, and secessionist movements in countries like Nigeria, Sudan, and Congo. In the Middle East, colonial borders were challenged by Pan-Arabism and Islamic revivalism. Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon have suffered internal wars and boundary disputes. In recent decades, South Sudan was created in 2011 after decades of ethnic conflict with North Sudan, and Kosovo unilaterally declared independence from Serbia in 2008, both reflecting the persistence of boundary-driven identity struggles. Overall, the redrawal of boundaries has been shaped by wars, treaties, nationalist movements, ideological confrontations, decolonization, and sometimes international mediation. While some changes brought peace and statehood, others generated long-lasting ethnic conflicts, refugee crises, and geopolitical rivalries. For administrators and policymakers, understanding the history and consequences of boundary changes is essential for conflict resolution, development planning, and international diplomacy. Previous year questions. What was the significance of the Treaty of Versailles in altering European boundaries after World War I? CAS 2021 answer. The treaty redrew the map of Europe by dismantling empires and creating new states like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, but often ignored ethnic complexities, leading to future tensions. In which year was Germany reunified after decades of Cold War division? CAS 2020 answer. 1990. What was the main reason for the partition of India in 1947? CAS 2018. Answer. Religious differences and demands by the Muslim League for a separate Muslim homeland, resulting in the creation of Pakistan and a massive humanitarian crisis. Let me know if you want the next lecture on colonialism and decolonization, Cold War, Indian national movement, geography, or any other specific topic from your syllabus. I'm with you from start to finish. You said. Colonialization and decolonialization, ChatGPT said. Here is your full-length, power-packed lecture on colonialism and decolonization, written exclusively for the CAS Officer Junior Timescale Stream 1 exam. This is a lecture style, based to advanced note filled with every essential idea, no fluff or table, and includes previous year questions and answers. This is your one-stop coaching content. Lecture 6, Colonialism and Decolonization, Genesis, Mechanisms, Resistance, and Legacy. Colonialism refers to the political, economic, and cultural domination of one country or region by another, often enforced through military conquest, coercion, and exploitation. The colonial period, especially between the 15th and 20th centuries, saw European powers establish control over vast territories across Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Oceania. While early colonialism was spearheaded by Spain and Portugal during the Age of Discovery, the modern colonial era intensified after the Industrial Revolution, when Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and others expanded aggressively in pursuit of raw materials, markets, and strategic control. The motives behind colonialism were multifold: economic, extracting raw materials; expanding markets, strategic, military bases and geopolitical influence; religious, missionary activities; and ideological, civilizing missions; social Darwinism; racial superiority theories. The British Empire, the largest in history, controlled territories on every continent. France dominated parts of West Africa and Southeast Asia. Belgium's exploitation of the Congo was particularly brutal. Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands also held colonies, though on a smaller scale. Colonialism operated through both direct and indirect rule. Direct rule involved the establishment of formal administrative structures controlled by the colonizers, while indirect rule manipulated existing local power hierarchies. Colonial economies were transformed into export-oriented systems, often destroying indigenous industries and enforcing monoculture economies, like cotton in Egypt or tea in India. Infrastructure such as railways and ports was built, but primarily to facilitate extraction, not development. Colonialism also caused massive cultural displacement. European languages, education systems, legal codes, and religions were imposed, often erasing or marginalizing local identities. In Africa and Asia, borders were drawn without regard for ethnic or tribal realities, creating artificial states that would face post-colonial conflict. Education was used both as a tool of control and as an unexpected instrument of resistance, creating a class of English-educated elites who would later spearhead nationalist movements. Resistance to colonialism took many forms: armed rebellions like the 1857 revolt in India, Maji-Maji rebellion in Tanganyika, Ashani wars in West Africa, cultural assertion, religious movements, and later, organized nationalism. Resistance to colonialism took many forms: armed rebellions like the 1857 revolt in India, Maji-Maji rebellion in Tanganyika, Ashani wars in West Africa, cultural assertion, religious movements, and later, organized nationalism. The 20th century saw the rise of mass anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa, especially after World War I and II. These wars weakened European powers economically and morally, exposed colonial troops to new political ideas, and highlighted the contradiction between fighting for freedom in Europe while denying it in colonies. Decolonization was the process by which colonies achieved independence and self-governance, particularly after 1945. It was driven by multiple factors: the exhaustion of colonial powers post-World War II, pressure from international bodies like the United Nations, rise of indigenous nationalist leaders like Gandhi, Nkrumah, Sukarno, Ho Chi Minh, Cold War dynamics as USA and USSR competed for influence, and mass civil resistance movements. Decolonization was at times peaceful, like in India at 1947 or Ghana at 1957, but often violent, as seen in Algeria's War of Independence 1954-62, Kenya's Mau Mau uprising, or the Vietnamese struggle against French and later American forces. India's independence in 1947 was a watershed moment, inspiring movements across Asia and Africa. Within a few decades, dozens of new nations emerged. The Bandung Conference 1955 and Non-Aligned Movement founded in 1961 marked the rise of a post-colonial consciousness, promoting sovereignty, anti-imperialism, and cooperation among newly independent states. However, decolonization also left deep scars: partition-induced violence, neo-colonial economic dependence, civil wars, and the challenge of building cohesive national identities within arbitrarily drawn borders. Some countries settler colonialism, where European settlers tried to permanently occupy land and establish supremacy, such as in South Africa, Algeria, and Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. These cases involved prolonged and bitter liberation struggles. In Latin America, decolonization had occurred earlier, 19th century, but was followed by neo-colonial economic dependence on Europe and the United States, often enforced through corporate dominance or military interventions. Post-colonial states also struggled with nation-building, often inheriting colonial bureaucracies, divided societies, and weak economies. Some fell into authoritarianism or became pawns in the Cold War. However, many have emerged as vibrant democracies, economies, and cultural hubs despite the enduring legacies of colonial rule. Today, neo-colonialism through debt, trade imbalances, cultural imperialism, and military alliances continues to be debated as a modern form of domination. Colonialism and decolonization have redefined global history. They shaped modern borders, identities, economic patterns, and global institutions. Understanding them is essential for addressing issues of inequality, conflict, cultural revival, and justice in the contemporary world. Previous year questions. How did World War II contribute to the process of decolonization? CAS 2020. Answer. World War II weakened European colonial powers economically and militarily, delegitimized imperialism, and fostered global anti-colonial sentiment, while also encouraging nationalist movements and international support for independence. What were the key features of colonial economic policies in India? CAS 2021. Answer. Colonial economic policies promoted raw material extraction, destroyed indigenous industries, discouraged Indian enterprise, and prioritized British interests, leading to poverty and underdevelopment. What is neocolonialism? CAS 2018. Answer. Neocolonialism refers to the indirect control of developing countries through economic, political, or cultural pressures by former colonial powers or global institutions, despite formal independence. Let me know what topic you want next. Cold War, Indian national